Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Ben here. I'm back again today doing another video, and the subject of today's video is going to be on the Cleveland Cavaliers and specifically Kevin Love. So why am I talking about Kevin Love when in a time when Kawhi Leonard is changing teams, Paul George has been traded, the Thunder might be trading Westbrook, DeMarcus Cousins just went to the Lakers. We still haven't even really talked about Durant to the Nets or Kyrie to the Nets or a ton of other things. Well, I wanted to talk about this today because I think that it is a bigger deal than people think it is. And I think sooner rather than later, Kevin Love might end up on a new team because a lot of teams will be looking to pair their current team or stars or key players with another all star. Teams like the Knicks missed out a lot on free agency. Teams like the Heat may be trying to team a guy like Jimmy Butler up with an all star because right now they basically have Dion Waiters, Bam Adebayo, and not a ton of like great secondary options to Jimmy Butler. Teams like the Mavericks had a ton of cap space and didn't necessarily use all of it. Same with things like the Kings and other teams. So there's a market out there for teams that missed out on huge free agents and are looking to add an all-star. And the Cavs don't really want to keep Kevin Love at this point. He's an all-star, basically around 30, 31, still in his prime, not really what a rebuilding team needs who's trying to go super young and collect draft picks and assets. So if he were like healthy and played 70 games, that wouldn't really be what the Cavaliers need at this point because they're actually trying to do worse rather than better right now if you're being serious about it. So I think that they will be looking to trade him pretty soon here, and that one of these teams that missed out on a key free agent could be looking to get him, or just another team in general that's looking to add some talent to their team. So today I propose that we look at some trade scenarios for Kevin Love. So just to review, to get an idea for his stats last year. So last year he played limited time, only 20 games. He didn't play much. He shot 39% from the field, so pretty awful. He shot 36% from three, so decent, above league average, below his career average. So he wasn't completely healthy during these games either. I should note he was not a shell of himself either, but just basically battling injuries and almost missed all of last year. Really, he shot. Let's see here. He did shoot 90% from the free throw line, which is very impressive and actually the highest of his career. Um, he averaged 17 points a game, 11 rebounds, 2 assists, uh, 2 turnovers, so pretty average numbers in line with his career averages. And really, he'd be a valuable second or third option for any team looking to contend in the playoffs and possibly go far. So I think there's lots of cool scenarios. And the first one that I came up with here was Kevin Love to the Mavericks in exchange for Justin Jackson, Dwight Powell, Tim Hardaway Jr., and a first round pick or maybe a first round pick, depending on how hard of a bargain the Cavaliers drive. But okay, so really, Tim Hardaway Jr. is basically cap filler and just saying like, hey, you get a guy back who can score 18 a game and fill the on-court production of Love adequately. You get Dwight Powell, who's a nice young asset, and he just re-upped with the Mavs, so you can do whatever you want with him. Start him, have him be a role player off the bench. You get Justin Jackson, who's a nice young guy, and you could develop him into something nice, sort of like a I'm trying to think of how maybe like a Trevor Ariza light sort of would be like what you'd be looking at in him to how you'd want to develop him as a player. Um, so you'd be getting some decent pieces back, and then maybe the draft pick if this isn't really selling the Cavaliers at all. But their starting lineup after this would probably look like, well, depending on who they want to start between Darius Garland and Colin Sexton, one of those two guys, along with that shooting guard, likely Tim Hardaway Jr. Small forward, probably Justin Jackson. Power forward is going to be Larry Nance Jr., I would bet. And then starting at center, Tristan Thompson. Coming off the bench, Dwight Powell, um, either Sexton or Garland, Jordan Clarkson, John Henson. So you'd have an okay bench, but again, this would be all about a rebuild for the Cavs. And then as for Dallas, you'd have a really potent offensive starting lineup of including, I don't know who exactly would start at point guard, maybe JJ Barea, maybe Trey Burke, maybe Jalen Brunson. Either way, one of those three guys at point, along with then probably Courtney Lee shooting guard, Doncic at the 3, Porzingis at the 4, and Kevin Love at the 5, or Porzingis at the 5 and Love at the 4. Either way, this would be a pretty bad defensive team. I will have to admit they'd have to really hope that they can find some, maybe like a Tyson Chandler would come back there as a vet and be a nice defensive presence and a veteran leader, and he could make up for some of the Kevin Love Porzingis lacking defense. But offensively, this team would be masterful with Doncic, Porzingis, and Kevin Love. Um, Lots of great spacing and a guy who could complement those guys well, and that he can shoot the three and create space for Luka to drive and Porzingis to post up, or Love can post up when Porzingis goes out to the 3-point line, and you just would have a ton of offensive possibilities for this team. Next, I have Kevin Love to the Houston Rockets in exchange for a first round pick, Eric Gordon, PJ Tucker, and Isaiah Hartenstein. So Hartenstein, first off, is just a throw in to make salaries work, but basically the Cavs would be getting a first round pick along with Eric Gordon, a decent player who can be a role model for a guy like Jordan Clarkson or Colin Sexton. And then PJ Tucker, who's just a good vet who maybe would get cut after this deal. Again, sort of cap filler, honestly. They'd basically be trading Kevin Love for a first and Eric Gordon. And PJ Tucker, as sad as it is, he would probably be bought out, I think, if this deal were to come to fruition. So the Cavaliers after this, they'd probably be starting like Darius Garland, or probably honestly Sexton because he's a sophomore. So you'd start Sexton, Eric Gordon, I would say, then probably Cedi Osman, and then maybe John Henson and Tristan Thompson, or Larry Nance Jr. and Tristan Thompson. And then off the bench, you'd have Jordan Clarkson, PJ Tucker, Darius Garland, John Henson. So that, again, like decent team, but you'd really be playing for the draft pick basically. And then for the Rockets, you'd add an all-star in his prime to a team that already has two all-stars. So your lineup, if you're the Rockets, you're going to be looking at Chris Paul, James Harden, and then probably at the small forward, that's going to be their biggest hole, but probably Gerald Green, honestly, or like Andre Iguodala or somebody off the buyout market if they get somebody like that. And then power forward, you're going to be looking at Love, and then center, Clint Capella. So my only trepidation with this trade would be that Kevin Love becomes the next Ryan Anderson, and that he plays well during the regular season, but defensively in the playoffs they have to bench him because he's too much of a liability. But I think at least for the regular season he'd be a great addition to this team. Much like Ryan Anderson, Ryan Anderson actually played a lot during the regular season when the Rockets won 65 games a year ago. So I think Kevin Love would fill that void really well, and he would be a good addition to this team as far as spacing and everything too. So I like the trade for the Cavaliers and the Rockets actually in that case. Mainly for the Rockets, the Cavaliers would be getting a little bit shortchanged. They'd essentially be trading just for a draft pick, but they'd be one step closer to rebuilding more properly. Next, I have Boston doing a straight up swap of Gordon Hayward for Kevin Love, but then Boston would also give up a first round pick because I think Gordon Hayward, we're all kind of accepting, is less than what he used to be, and Kevin Love is still relatively more healthy and valuable. So I think that Cleveland would also have to receive a first round pick. So from Cleveland's side, you get the first round pick and essentially salary cap filler in Gordon Hayward, uh, not to be too blunt about it, but honestly, at this point, last year Gordon Hayward averaged 11 points a game on mediocre efficiencies. So yeah, he'd basically be salary cap filler at that point. His deal is shorter than Kevin Love's, so they'd be getting that money off the books quicker, so that's an incentive too. And he would allow them to rebuild without being too good of a player that he would like if you're a rebuilding team, you want to win 20 games, you don't want to win 28 to 32. So I think he is mediocre to average enough where he wouldn't increase their win total by playing a lot of minutes necessarily. So he's the kind of player you want to receive if you're trying to rebuild, like what the Nets did this year by acquiring Alan Crabb, or what Charlotte did or Orlando did by acquiring Timofey Mozgov. Um, like, would you acquire these big bad contracts? You're not expecting them to play a ton, like when the let's say when the Wizard or when the Nets took on Dwight Howard last summer, they didn't play him then and expect him to be their starter. They cut him right away. It's because they were looking just to take up cap space. That's what Cleveland would be doing here. Essentially just looking to take up their cap space so their young guys can develop and they don't have to worry about other guys coming in taking their spots. So your lineup after this for the Cavs would look like, again, probably Sexton, Clarkson, Hayward, Larry Nance, and Tristan Thompson with off the bench John Henson, Garland, Dellavedova, Stauskas. Then for Boston, it's a lot more exciting because you already have Kemba Walker, Tatum, and Jaylen Brown, and then you bringing in a guy like Kevin Love, I think would help this team. And they'd be basically about where they were last year, but just with I think better locker room guys. Kevin Love's a guy who's not afraid to take a back seat on a really good team, like he did in Cleveland with LeBron and Kyrie. I think that the pecking order on this team would be basically like Kemba and Tatum, like 1A and 1B sort of, and then like Jaylen Brown and Kevin Love basically like 3 and 4, but like either guy I think would be better on a given night. So like some nights it might be Kevin Love scoring 20 and Jaylen Brown scoring 10, and then other nights it could be like Kevin Love just basically focusing on rebounding and finishing with a stat line of 9 points and 14 rebounds, but then like Jaylen Brown having 20 points. So I think that Kevin Love's a guy who's fine with taking a back seat, so he'd be healthy for Boston. And then they'd have a starting lineup that would look like basically, well, I don't know what their starting lineup would look like, but basically their core five guys would be, um, let's see here. Depend if you want to play Ennis Cantor and Kevin Love together, but you could have kind of like your death lineup of Kemba, Marcus Smart, um, Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum, and Kevin Love. That would be like their best five in my opinion. So that's their death lineup at the end of the games. But they might play with Cantor a little bit too. We'd have to see. Next trade I have would be Kevin Love to the Heat to pair up with Jimmy Butler in exchange for James Johnson, excuse me, who would basically be cap filler, along with Justice Winslow and a first round pick, possibly 2 first round picks, depending on how hard of a bargain Miami or Cleveland drives. But I'd expect 1 first round pick would be good enough. So what are you getting if you're Cleveland? James Johnson, salary cap filler, Justice Winslow, a nice young player that you can add to your plethora of nice young players, and then a 1st round pick to build for the future. So your starting lineup for Cleveland after this, you'd have all the usual suspects except at that starting small forward slot, you'd plug in Justice Winslow, and then you have the 1st round pick next year, which could be pretty valuable depending on how good the Heat are. I'm not totally sold on this Heat team yet, just because they seem like a lot of role players and Jimmy Butler. If they were to add Kevin Love, they'd probably be quite a bit better though. And then for the Heat, your starting lineup would probably be like Dragic, Jimmy Butler, Derek Jones, um, Kevin Love, and Bam, with like Kelly Oubre, Dion Waiters coming off the bench, along with a few other guys there. Let me think here. Who else would be coming off the bench? You'd have Myers Leonard also coming off the bench. So decent team. You'd be definitely trading some depth to get Kevin Love, but I think it would be worth it for this team, who basically just has a ton of role players at this point. The last trade I have on here would be kind of the Godfather trade. I think that would make that this team would just be basically put over the top if they were to acquire Kevin Love, and that is the Utah Jazz. So I have the Utah Jazz getting Kevin Love in exchange for basically a ton of young players and Joe Ingles, along with a 1st round pick or 2 1st round picks if Cleveland really demands it. So I have Cleveland getting Royce O'Neal, who's like 23, Tony Bradley, who's also like 23, Dante Exum, who's like 24, 25, still young and promising, and then Joe Ingles, basically a salary cap filler, who they would maybe even cut or maybe keep as a veteran to team up with their fellow Aussie, Australian-born Matthew Dellavedova, because Joe Ingles is Australian, if you didn't know that. So for Cleveland, the whole story is the same as far as what their core would look like, but you'd basically have more guys off the bench. Exum, Bradley, and O'Neal would all come off the bench in my opinion, and you have a starting lineup of Sexton, Clarkson, Joe Ingles, Larry Nance Jr., and Tristan Thompson. So their side would basically be like, okay, we're building for the future, like every other trade scenario on here. But for for Utah Jazz, it'd be the much more interesting side, where you could boast a starting five of Mike Conley Jr., Donovan Mitchell, Bojan Bogdanovic, Kevin Love, Rudy Gobert. So would this team have a ton of depth? No, they would basically have really no depth after this trade. They'd have Ed Davis, Jeff Green, Emmanuel Mudiay, Epe Udo. That would be their bench. So not a ton of wing depth at all, but they would have a starting lineup that would only be rivaled by, say, like Philadelphia or maybe the Clippers, or maybe not even the Clippers because they'll bring a ton of their great guys off the bench, but they could arguably have the best starting lineup in basketball if they were to pull off a trade like this. Um, it would help with their spacing. They don't really need him for defense because they have already a ton of good defenders between Mike Conley and Rudy Gobert. Their defense would be really good, and Rudy Gobert's rim protection would make up for Kevin Love's porous defense and his space. But Kevin Love's spacing would be welcome on this team. He would stretch out the power forward position, and he's just a guy who he can basically score in any possible way. He can post up, high post, low post, mid range, 3 pointers. He can do it all. He can do a little bit of everything on offense. So I think that'd be useful for a team like this. And I think that this would definitely propel the Jazz to be one of, if not the best team in the West. So there you have it, guys. That is my my trade scenarios for Kevin Love. Let me know your thoughts below if you have any. Hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope you have a great day. Bye.